Sono contento di presentarvi un amico, John Waters, amico dell'Irlanda, di cui qualcosa si può dire proprio che è uno che, vedendo il percorso che ha fatto, si può dire quello che abbiamo cantato il primo canto: è bella la strada per chi cammina, perché vedendole camminare, vedendole lasciarsi colpire dal reale, sempre che l'incontro ti sorprende, perché è sempre come, non so come dire, come in un travaglio di cercare la parola giusta, di scoprire, sempre è irrequieto, nel senso bello del termine, di capire sempre di più. Per questo lo sento veramente compagno e per questo voglio anche presentarvelo, che voi potete conoscerlo, perché lui ha un'esperienza da raccontare, un cammino che ha fatto, di cui tanti possiamo veramente imparare. Per questo lo ringrazio che abbia accettato di essere qui con noi questa sera. Se c'è qualcosa che per lui è stato decisivo, è proprio quello che noi stiamo parlando dall'inizio d'anno. Quello che l'ha segnato di più è stato proprio il 10° capitolo del senso religioso. Adesso mi auguro che ve lo spieghi, perché sarà un'altra cosa sentirlo da lui.
Thank you. First, I want to say thank you for today, both to He who does everything and to each of you, all 5,801 of you. I have counted as carefully as I could, for your presence and in the absolute sense of presence. I was sitting in the front row twice today and watching the screen, the pictures of Sagrada Familia, and listening to the music, and before I was aware of the place being empty, and suddenly I was aware of the place being full, having filled in silence, and this was for me deeply moving. There's so many things I've really, always it is a special occasion for me to come to a Communion Liberazione event, but this is very special because of the intensity of the attention and the intensity of the questioning, the attention to everything that really is deeply, deeply moving for me. And I wonder, you know, what I can give you, not so much in return, but how can I aspire to this same relationship tonight. I was thinking, you know, this afternoon, if I could go back 35 years and be one of you, and if there were somebody here speaking as I'm speaking to you about an experience of a life in that way, would it change my life? Would anything I heard from this person set me on a different path, different direction? I don't know. I doubt it in a way, because I don't think that words really of themselves can achieve this. We really can communicate by comparison, when I tell you my experience. I think that what happens is that by igniting in myself my own experience, by my understanding of it, I hope to set off something in you of your experience. And the words are really nothing. The words are really the current of the communication. They are the energy of the communication, but they are not the communication. I'm struck by the theme, the inexorable positivity of reality. This word positivity really jumps out at me because we have heard from Giussani so much, from Don Caron, from the Pope in recent times in the Bundestag, of the prejudice of positivism. And I'm very struck by the similarities between these words in both English and in Italian, that they are almost identical words, and yet they are, in another sense, completely opposite. They seem to, what we talk about when we talk about the inexorable positivity of reality is really completely against the positivism that the Pope speaks of, that Giussani speaks of. And this is, I think, at the core of my struggle with reality, to engage myself in reality, to understand reality through my life. I was brought up in a traditional Catholic family in the west of Ireland. A very intense Catholic experience as a child, probably more so than the average child of the time, which would have been in the 60s and the 70s. And really, you know, it's easy now to go back, to look back and say, well, it was deficient in some ways. But I think this is probably wrong to do this, because really it was a very rich experience in many, many ways. I mean, perhaps there was a sense in which it became sentimentalized. Perhaps it was excessively moralistic. Nevertheless, it was deeply real. For me as a child, it was a deeply real relationship that I had with Christ. I did not for an instant doubt his existence, his presence, his accompanying me every moment. Like a brother, like a father, like a close friend, holding my hand through life, through my childhood, all the time, talking to me talking to him. This was a deeply real experience. Perhaps, as I say, it was, you know, deficient insofar as that there was some kind of block that prevented me growing with this, bringing this with me. That at a certain point, when I reached my teens, I began to grow out of it. And, you know, the first indicator of some problem is the sense that one has that this growing out of it is natural, that it is actually logical, that, you know, you put these childish things behind you. And for so many years I would have thought like that this was the way, this was really a good way of describing what had happened to me. Another way of describing what had happened to me was that at a certain point in my teens, I became more aware of the world as being a place which seemed to be at odds, really in opposition to this upbringing, of this childhood upbringing in Christ and in Christianity. Because there was suddenly, and this was in the 1970s Ireland, when what had previously been a very dark and moribund culture became outward-looking and became invaded by new influences, rock music, pop music, television, football, all of these things, celebrity, stardom, you know, so many things which were deeply seductive to me as a teenager, really offering a new kind of freedom that I had previously not envisaged. And it seemed to me really, I think now, and this is looking back, but I think really I can describe this accurately, that at that time there seemed to be a conflict, almost an incompatibility between this relationship with Christ, this upbringing, and this new world, this new freedom. Really that I had to choose between the two, to leave one behind and to go on, or to stay with the other, and that the two things could not coexist. And yet it wasn't that I rejected Christ. It wasn't that I turned my back entirely on this childhood relationship, this friendship, this closeness. at least I didn't do so with any sense of that I was doing something good. I think I certainly did so, but I did so, I think, guiltily, ashamed, embarrassed. Nevertheless, the seduction of freedom was so powerful that I felt there was no other option. And so I went on this journey. It seemed to me that I was going into the world as opposed to going into reality as opposed to staying in this childhood relationship. And so this began a journey in freedom, in this kind of freedom, which seemed to me the only kind. And you know, now I can put certain words on this experience. And I have written about it quite a lot, particularly in a book I wrote which is called Lapsed Agnostic. And in that book I use a particular thread to tell, in a sense, the whole story. That thread is my experience of alcohol. Because I think that this is a real experience. It's a very graphic experience for me, but it's also a metaphor of freedom. Because all of the conditions of this idea of freedom that so seduced me were present in this relationship with alcohol. You know, when I got to my late teens, I started to become aware that I was very shy, very inhibited, very incapable of really interacting with people, with having conversations, dancing. These things were beyond me. But I discovered one night I went to a pub and I had a drink of beer. And I found that it changed me completely. I found that it was like the missing part of myself. It was like that, you know, back at the hospital, when my mother was given the baby, which was me, they forgot to give her the bottle, which would have made the package complete. Because when I put this in, I was whole, I was complete. I could talk, I could dance, I could do all of the things that were impossible. It was like putting fuel in a motorbike. And this was the beginning of really a sense of freedom, a new sense of freedom, that I thought was without cost. I thought was without end, that it was something that could continue indefinitely, for all my life if necessary. But I was to find that this was wrong, that this was not to be my experience. Now, if we listen to the culture that I talk about, the positivistic culture, and how it describes me and my experience, how it would describe this kind of experience, it tends to medicalize this experience. It tends to speak about a pathology which is particular to individuals, certain individuals. And in a certain sense, you know, this is the strange thing about positivism, that it is almost like in everything, it is almost identical to reality in a certain sense. It obscures reality almost completely. It is almost, you know, you can look at the same image, the same person, and you can see either the version of them which is given to you in this culture. A person, you know, they're a citizen, they are a commuter, they are a worker, they are, or else you can see that behind that is the created being, the created person. And in these two images seem to go to adhere to one another in our culture, so that one obscures the other. To the extent that it is possible to live one's life and not be aware that there is a more fundamental image behind that which is placed there by the culture. And so it is with all of the things that affect us in our culture. All the things that the experiences we have are described for us in ways which reduce them in this way. And so with my problem would be called alcoholism. But in a certain sense it is a useful word. If you want to go to a treatment center, if you want to go through a certain program, if you want to go to Alcoholics Anonymous and learn to go through the 12 steps, all of these things which are important in pulling one back from the brink. But there is a different explanation as well, a deeper one. Really, what had happened to me was that I had misunderstood myself in reality. I had misunderstood my humanity. That seduction of that drink, which allowed me to become whole, had led me to into a false version of myself. You know, I remember one night, I don't want to bore you with my war stories, but I'll just tell you one particular. One night, one morning, I woke up with no front teeth when I was drinking, and I couldn't remember anything. And subsequently, I was found that I was told that what had happened was that I had been at the dance hall and had been standing on the edge of the dance floor and had started to imagine that the dance floor was actually a swimming pool. And I had dived into the swimming pool. This is a radical misunderstanding of reality. So, eventually, I got to, really, as I often say, at the edge of a cliff. I reached a point where this journey in freedom, this journey of seeking the wholeness which I felt, which I intuited, and which seemed to actually, you know, in the early stages of drinking, seemed to come to me in this substance. It began to recede. It began to become further and further away. So I needed to more and more and more to catch up with it, and still I couldn't catch it. And eventually I reached the end of the possibility of this way of living. And this is where I had my first blessing, really, you know, because, and we can talk about luck, the word luck, you know, but I was blessed to find myself at this edge of this cliff, and there were people there who had been on this journey too, who started to talk to me about what had happened to me. And they weren't using necessarily the words, the medicalizing words. They were using words which were really, to me, incongruous, unfamiliar in the sense of this context. I couldn't understand what they meant. Because they said to me, you know, you have misunderstood your nature. You have misunderstood your structure. What about God? And I thought, oh, this is, no. Because this seemed to be completely disconnected, implausible, irrelevant, really. So I said, no, what? And my intuition then was, so this is a kind of a Puritan thing, you know, that it's a moralistic thing whereby, you know, I've had all my fun, I've front-loaded my fun, and now I must pay. This is my initial understanding. But no, they said, no, this is not it. The point is that you have misunderstood your relationship with reality. You have misunderstood the nature of your being. You have misunderstood your dependency in reality. All of these things. And I'm telling this story very quickly now, but this took place over months, years. Gradually, through pain and through going back again and asking questions and looking at the experience that I was having. For example, you know, I'll just give you an example of prayer. Prayer, I had not prayed for maybe 15 years in any way. And I couldn't imagine, you know, that I could now, having in a sense deserted this Christ of my childhood, walked away from him in the middle of the night. How could I pray to him now? How could I, you know, it would seem to be both an ignominious thing and also presumptuous, you know, to think that he would want to see me again after all those years. So literally, I don't say that I could not pray, you know, I found it difficult. No, I say I could not pray. And one day a man said to me, he said, do you pray? And I said, no, well, no, I can't. He said, well, try to pray. So I tried to say words for a while, and I found them really it was a slow process, a very unsatisfactory process. But then, one day he said to me, you know, maybe you should try to pray on your knees. And this was to me unthinkable. It was not only unthinkable, but impossible. The idea of me, even in a room on my own, completely with nobody around, being able to go on my knees, it was physically impossible. My knees would not bend for this. They would refuse to bend for this. And the man, I told the man this, and he said, I understand. I have come across this before. And what he said was, I have a solution. He said, in the morning when you are putting on your shoes, take one of your shoes and throw it under the bed. And you will find that you have to kneel down to retrieve it. And when you're there, remember to say your prayers. And this sounds absurd, but it was what is necessary. So when we talk about, when Don Quixote talks about positivism as a virus, it is real. It is real virus which enters into the very DNA of the human being, into the very joints, into the very muscles of our being. It is not this is not an abstract metaphor. This is a real phenomenon that occurs culturally. So this was the beginning of a new relationship with reality. This is the beginning of a kind of a defrosting of me. You know, and it's very much similar to when you want to defrost your fridge. You have to, first of all, you plug it out. And nothing happens. And nothing happens. And nothing happens. And then maybe you hear a crack. And then nothing happens. And then, in a long time, another crack. And this is gradually this process of really becoming aware that being on my knees is not such a bad thing. Suddenly I find myself happier to be on my knees. And then I observe my life, and people ask me, well, how is it now? And I say, well, it's better. Yeah, it's better. And do you know why? No, I don't know why. But it is better. And this is evidence. You know, positivism, the culture that I speak of, doesn't allow this as evidence. But experience is evidence, even if I don't understand it. Repeated experience, even if it is, the reasons for it are unclear, is still evidence. And I cannot deny that if my life is getting better, it must be to do with something that has happened in my life, something something that's changed in me. So, this has been my experience. This is the beginning of my journey. What? Back to what? Back to myself. Not back to the institution of Catholicism, not even back to Christ, because that's a different story. That's a different, it's a longer story. I'll come back to that. But what I wanted to do was to tell that story briefly so as to really illustrate something to you about our culture and how this idea that a version of reality can be superimposed upon the real, which seems to cohere, which seems to explain everything, and which really infects our consciousness to the point where what is really real seems implausible, seems fantastic. Has to be put aside, has to be, in a sense, marginalized, so that we think all the time, even no matter how, any of us in this room now are open, no matter what our understanding of what Giussani has said, no matter how we have made it come to life in our everyday lives, we are still open to walking into a room and beginning a conversation with people in which all of this is left outside, in which all of this is denied. You know, this is for me is the meaning of when Christ says to Peter, you know, before the cock crows you will deny me 3 times. And Peter says, no, this is... But it happens to me every day. I'm aware of myself really evading, of formulating sentences which seek to escape what I know, because I'm afraid of seeming to be irrational. I'll give you an example, which is related to my own experience in this way, but it's a very public matter. The pop singer Amy Winehouse, who died in the summer, uh, really from alcoholic poisoning. You know, she had drunk more than enough to kill her. She died of acute toxicity. And now in our culture, this is presented from different perspectives in our media. You know, I have a headline here. After cleaning up her act, Winehouse drank herself to death in final binge. If you wanted to be truthful, you would say Winehouse dies of a misunderstanding of from misunderstanding her own nature. This is my intuition from my experience, because I have watched her because I believe she was an astonishing genius, coming from the tradition of Billie Holiday, Ella Fitzgerald. A voice from somewhere deep down in the very soul of humanity, which had the capacity to speak to us of our own humanity. And yet she lived this life where, you know, the tabloid press would talk about her as a cliche, a rock and roll cliche, you know, that she is given to excess of alcohol and drugs, as though these two things, being a pop star, being a singer, and alcohol and drugs, automatically come together. Why? Why would they come together? Why should they come together more than if somebody is a plumber or a bus conductor or a train driver? Why? There is a reason in a way, because it seems, I think, you know, it struck me watching her sing that she was really so frail and fragile, and yet this extraordinary power seemed to go through her when she sang. This power which didn't seem to belong to her. She seemed merely to be the instrument of this power. Like the filament of a bulb, you know, in the tungsten filament, which is so fine and fragile. And yet, when the power goes through it, it lights up. And the more fragile it is, the brighter is the light. And it seemed to me that like so many great artists, this is what she was. But it seemed to me also that, you know, if to be there and not to understand what is happening to you, to be there at the center of this power and not to know what it is, not to have the voice to tell you that is where you are, why this is happening, is really to be doomed in a way. Because when it stops, when the light goes out, you need to stay in this place. You cannot simply retreat from it. Because this is really, like for me, the alcohol, the intuition of this correspondence which drives me, the intuition of the goal of my desire is really this is as close as we can imagine getting as human beings in this way. And so there is this parallel, this underneath story of Amy Winehouse, you know, the human story of this person who was gifted in this way, with this power, with this capacity, and who was really destroyed by failing to understand it, by not having somebody to say, it's okay, this is what is happening. And, you know, and for all of us then, who receive this story, it is distorted, it is reduced. You know, tragic Amy. You know, as if it was simply inevitable. There's this sense that she's a pop star, she would take drugs and drink, so what? It's inevitable. It's written all over her story. And in a sense it is, but for an entirely different reason. Precisely because we describe this experience in this way, rather than to say, what is my nature? What is my desire for? What does my voice give witness to, really? Even if I don't know. So, this is an example, I think, in our culture of something which, every day, we have these examples, where the culture gives us a version which appears to cohere to the facts, appears to explain everything, but it leaves out so much. It leaves out, in this case, the humanity of the person. The fact that she died, this woman, when she wasn't on stage, she had lived a life. She had her breakfast. She made her own toast. She lay for the last time in her bed on her own. Was found by her driver. A human story behind what is presented to us as the truth of this story. And there are so many, many examples of this in our culture. Indeed, you could say almost everything is an example. Now we speak about the financial crisis. And we speak about technical terms. We have the debt. We have the proposals for different solutions concerning the euro, fiscal union, all of these things. But really, there is no, and against that, there is then the other voice, which is really the voice of, the voice of the left, which is really to destroy everything, to withdraw, to refuse, we must not pay our debts, and so on. And what is missing from this is a human version, a version of this story that reflects what happened from a human point of view. And it seems to me that what happened is that the debt, if we could draw a picture of the debt of Italy or of Ireland, I'm not sure which is bigger, the debt I mean, but it's like the debt is really like an expression of our desire gone wrong, our desire in the wrong place, that our desire has really bulged out like a swelling in the wrong place because we have misunderstood what it was. And when you see what debt is really, what is debt? It is borrowing from the next generation. It is grasping the answer to my desire now from the future, reaching into the future to pull something towards myself, thinking like me with a drink, like Amy Winehouse with a bottle of vodka by her bedside. So these are different versions of. Now, if I go into the Irish Times on Monday morning to an editorial conference and I speak about something like this as a misunderstanding of desire, they will say, he's crazy. This religion has gone to his head. So this is what is to really, be aware of what is happening in our culture. That the false version is the one that seems most reasonable, the one that seems most rational. Something has happened to us that is really, the virus has affected us so that the very nature of myself, and I mean, I talked earlier about my own experience of drink, that it is my own structure that is at stake, my own structure that is on the line here, my own humanity. And yet, in order to actually live, to speak in the culture, to deal with other people, I must exclude this. I must exclude this version. I must, in a sense, accept a medicalized version of my condition. So this is a terrifying idea, that the truth is inaccessible culturally. This is a terrifying idea for me as myself, but for me as a parent, that I must let my child, who is now 15, go into a world in which the truth is inaccessible culturally. It's a terrifying thought. And that's why, I take a great comfort today in seeing you all, and the sincerity and the purpose of your demeanor and your participation in this. And I don't wish to sound patronizing, because it's not. I really sincerely mean this as really a very hopeful sign that what Giussani has, his intuition and his expansion on this, has really offered for the first time in my lifetime both the capacity to understand what is happening in our culture, and also the antidote, the method by which we can overcome this. And of course the method is really very, very simple, shockingly simple, but really sensational. It's in the first page of chapter 10. Picture yourself being born, coming out of your mother's womb at the age you are now at this very moment in terms of your development and consciousness. What would be the first, absolutely your initial reaction? If I were to open my eyes for the first time in this instant, emerging from my mother's womb, I would be overpowered by the wonder and awe of things as a presence. I would be bowled over and amazed by the stupefying repercussion of a presence which is expressed in current language by the word thing. Things, that's something. Thing which is a concrete and, if you please, banal version of the word being. Being not as some abstract entity, but as presence. A presence which I do not myself make, which I find. A presence which imposes itself upon me. And this is the story of my life, you know, in slow motion. You know, my life is really this happening gradually over time. It's bringing to this moment when I stumble upon this sentence, this paragraph, and think, it is possible to come out of this culture. It is possible to see clearly. It is possible to recover from this. To return to being a child again. This idea that, because it's, of course, the whole process I have described, the implication at the heart of this story of my turning my back on Christ, going off in search of freedom into the world, growing up, as it were. All this implies that, you know, I have left behind childish things, which is true. But that our culture tells us that this is a good thing, a positive thing, that we become more realistic, we become more rational. But what I have discovered in my life is that the opposite is true. That I have become less realistic. That I became less realistic. I mean, if you are trying to imagine, if you imagine that a dance floor is a swimming pool, you cannot claim to be realistic. So, the culture really, in the most extreme way, misled me. The virus had so infected my consciousness that I had lost sight of myself. And this, but I'm still prone to this every day. This method of going back to the moment of my birth is not something I do once, or once a year, or once a month. In a sense, I do it every moment. I renew myself every moment, because the culture is inexorable as well, in its desire to mislead me. In its desire, as the Pope said, you know, in the Bundestag, man has built a bunker with no windows. And the reason he built it was to imply to himself that he had created reality. That here was a reality that man could inhabit and claim he had created. But the bunker closes us down. The bunker shuts us off from the light. And the bunker shuts us off from an understanding of ourselves. Because in the bunker we become machines, we become medicalized, we become mechanized. And we think this is progress. A couple of months ago I was speaking in Dublin about the Irish poet Patrick Kavanagh, who is like an Irish Leopardi. Because he is somebody who looks at reality in the most penetrative way. In a deeply religious way. He always called himself a Catholic poet. And he didn't mean by that he went to Mass on Sunday, or that he adhere to the rules of the faith or anything like that. He meant that when he looked at a tree or a flower, that he saw a presence which was created. And every word in his poetry reflects this. And yet, even though Patrick Kavanagh is celebrated as one of our leading poets, perhaps second only to Yeats in terms of reputation in the world, it's strange that you can hear discussion after discussion about Patrick Kavanagh and there is no mention of this. There's no mention of his Catholicism. There's no mention of his sense of the created nature of the world. Kavanagh used to talk about the flash, which was really for him the intrusion of the other into reality. And that when this happened in words, it became a poem. So I was talking about this, and the audience was mixed. It wasn't like a Catholic church gathering. It was a mixed gathering, and some of the people were very uneasy, I could feel. And at the end then, a man who was kind of like the spokesman of the disaffected said to me, you know, I didn't come here for a lecture about Catholicism. I came here to hear about Patrick Kavanagh. And I said, but you know, I don't think it is possible to talk about Patrick Kavanagh without talking about his Catholicism. And he says, you know, he says, don't you realize that man has been to the moon? And really, you know, in the few instances when after this phrase kind of was uttered, I really, in the way that you can really acquire a vast understanding, which is almost beyond words, in a very short time. I recognize this phrase as really speaking up, summoning up the whole, really making visible the positivism that the Pope talks about, that Giussani talks about. Because here's a man saying, look, we leave all that behind. We've left all that behind because we have made progress. We are making progress. We are discovering things. You know, we're very close to knowing everything. Come on, soon, we've been to the moon, you know. There's very little more to be achieved. So we already know that this is all nonsense. And you know, I wasn't meaning to be flippant or smart alecky, but I found myself involuntarily saying to him, have you been to the moon? And he said, no. And I said, have you met anybody who has been to the moon? And he said, no. I said, so what difference does it make to you if another man has been to the moon? How are you changed by this? Why do you feel that this achievement is yours? What does this achievement mean for you? And he didn't really understand what I meant. And at the time I didn't really quite understand what I was saying myself. But really I think this goes to the heart of what we think we know about ourselves, about our condition as human beings. Because all the time we're being given little snippets of information about progress, about the progress of man. And the seduction is that each one implies that omniscience is within reach. A few more pieces remain to be accumulated before we have the full picture. And man becomes his own master. And I don't trust this. Because it's not that I want to disparage the achievement of man. Science is a wonderful thing. To know is a wonderful thing. And I have become convinced that there is no knowledge that will undermine what I believe now. But it strikes me that, you know, to say man has been to the moon, what does it mean in the universe, in which the vastness of the universe? It's a wonderful achievement from here. But from the furthest point of the universe, what does it mean? Imagine if a little baby who can't walk was crawling around on the floor underneath the stage. And somehow or other, this baby managed to come up on the platform. This is a greater achievement than man going to the moon, in real terms, which is not to disparage the achievement, but simply to put it in perspective. And what we're missing in all of this sense of rumored omniscience, rumored omnipotence, is perspective. The perspective, really, which can only be achieved on our knees. This is the way we see the universe in its correct perspective. Because one of the things that was said to me when I was at that cliff edge, as a way of describing my condition, was that what I had done in my life was that I had removed God from the throne. And seeing the throne vacant, I had sat on the throne. And there I have found myself, having removed God from my existence, at least in my consciousness. I found myself with having the responsibility of God in my life, with none of the power. And this amplified the fears within myself. So the process which had started this, which is this pursuit of freedom through this substance, accelerated. Because in order to extinguish the fears, I had to drink more and more and more. So the cycle accelerates exponentially until finally you reach the edge of the cliff. So this is really all I can offer you. A brief history of my own mistakes. And the joy of actually living to see them for what they are. The joy to be able to see in this book of Giussani's. And this is a strange book because, you know, it's a very difficult book in some ways. And yet you cannot say that there is very much in it that you didn't already know in some way. What is there is really just the awakening of the intuitions that are already inside and the connecting of those intuitions. This is the great work of genius that this book is, really. That it is really, as I've often said, the most radical book that I've ever read, because what it describes is me, is the conditions I live in, the tendencies that I'm prone to, and then it offers me the way back. Thank you.
Sentendo John si capisce bene perché Don Giussani insiste che il problema della vita è un problema di conoscenza, perché quello che veramente è in discussione, come abbiamo visto oggi, è qual è la natura dell'io. Perché quello che la nostra cultura ha frainteso è la propria umanità, pensando che è un problema di malattia, un problema di altra natura. Aver frainteso qual è il vero rapporto con la realtà. E trovare uno come John che ci aiuta a capire questo è veramente una grazia, perché questo ci rende consapevoli di qual è la portata di quella strada che stiamo facendo insieme. Perché lui ci ha testimoniato che se noi non capiamo questo, noi non capiremo noi stessi e ci esporremo a sbagliare di nuovo. Per questo si capisce bene perché per lui il senso religioso è un libro che gli fa compagnia. Io l'ho visto portarle in televisione quando è chiamato a fare un'intervista o alla radio, perché per lui, come ci ha detto, non è che lo leggi una volta ogni tot, lo rileggi, è quello che gli fa compagnia, che è diverso di fare come se fosse un dovere. È la possibilità di capirsi. E per questo dice che è il libro più radicale che ha mai letto. Per questo le ringraziamo. Perché abbiamo visto in lui che cosa vuol dire rendere di nuovo se stesso, ritornare a se stesso. Avendo davanti una storia, un cammino, una persona che ha fatto un cammino. Grazie.